Yo, this is Bench Gamer here. So I just finished the most recent Imaginarium Theater reset, and this is the one where they put in the new changes that they were talking about from the 5.0 live stream. So going into it, I knew that there were going to be a little bit of a change, but I was always kind of skeptical about how all of these changes would come together into like a package that actually made the game mode more enjoyable. Because let's be honest, over the past 4 years, they didn't really add anything to the end game for Genshin Impact. And when they did with Imaginarium Theater, which was like, I think it's been 2 to 3 months at this point, it didn't really meet the expectations of a lot of people. There were a lot of criticisms from people like myself who thought that it was too easy because we've just been playing this game for so long that we have not only just vertically invested into all of our characters but also horizontally across multiple characters. We just have so many characters now that we can just breeze through anything in Spiral Abyss. And so for people like us who are probably above average in terms of our investment in the game's characters and endgame content, it was just way too easy. The enemies didn't have as high of a level as they did in Spiral Abyss, which meant they were less beefy, which meant they hit less hard, which to be honest is not really that big of a problem because for the most part the enemies don't it doesn't really matter how much the enemies attack you if you have a shield on. I think the last time I was really challenged by Spiral Abyss was during the mid Sumeru patches. I think, yeah, that was the last time I was really challenged by it, the Consecrated Beast and the Weenut. So it's been a long time since Spiral Abyss has been any sort of a challenge. Sometimes they throw like 2 Pyro Heralds at you, sometimes they throw 3 Crow Heralds at you, whatever they're called. I don't actually think they're called Crow Heralds now that I think about it, but you know what I'm talking about, the sword guys that, charge you down. So, and they also recently added like the recent Spiral Abyss, I believe, is the highest HP pool that the enemies have ever had. And there's also some Geo element checks. There's Geo Shields, and the Hydrotopa is immune to Hydro. So there are some elemental checks that is going on in the new recent Spiral Abyss. And from what I've been seeing on the internet, it is probably the most, technically speaking, the most challenging in terms of the DPS check and the element check. But it's still just too easy for me because I've just vertically invested so much into my characters. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter that I can't optimally get the shields down to like get the shields off, because once I do have them off, I can just DPS them down in 3 or 4 hits, right? So I can understand what they're trying to do with the level scaling in Imaginarium Theater. Like, I know that because of the character check as well as the element restrictions and the RNG intrinsic in the system itself, they have to make it easier than Spiral Abyss. Otherwise, it would literally just be a harder Spiral Abyss. So I understand where they were coming from. It's just that, objectively speaking, it just wasn't that fun for me. Subjectively, I mean. And there was the other side of the criticism, which was all about how people who haven't been playing as long as we have, who have not spent as much money, maybe they just didn't invest in the right way because they only invested in a certain kind of character. Like maybe they only like electro characters. Maybe they only liked Yayamiko, so they got all the constellations from Yayamiko and they were free to play. So they just saved up for a year or more for that one character, and then they saved up a year or more for the constellations for another character, and that kind of screwed you over when it came to doing another mode like Imaginarium Theater that wasn't Spiral Abyss. And I do think that there is an element of people just not liking the game mode simply because it's different from Spiral Abyss and requires you to play this game in another way. Like, I do realize that there are legitimate criticisms, but in some part, a lot of it, like, not a lot of it, but a significant part of it probably does have to do with the fact that the game mode is just different. So I can see where people are coming from in terms of the criticisms, as well as myself just feeling like it was too easy. So there was a lot that was wrong with the initial Imaginarium Theater. And to be frank, some of that stuff is still in the new one. I won't say that it's completely fixed, but I was really surprised by the new Imaginarium Theater reset and how much I enjoyed it. I think that with the changes that they have made to the game mode, it is actually legitimately just a good game mode now, and it hits the mark as to where I expected the original Imaginarium Theater to be when I first launched. And if you want to be like super cynical, if you want to see the super cynical side of me, I almost think that they intentionally did it. They intentionally made the previous Imaginarium Theater worse and then improved it, because there are some really convenient things. Like, have you noticed that with the additional rewards that they are giving you in the new floors for Imaginarium Theater, combined with Spiral Abyss, it conveniently comes out to just exactly 1600 Primo Gems every single month. So you're getting exactly 10 wishes if you do all the new endgame content as well as the old endgame content. You now get exactly 10 wishes per month, which is super convenient if you ask me. It almost feels like they were planning on making these changes in the first place, or at least adding in a new difficulty mode and giving us more rewards for this new difficulty mode. And yeah, so that's basically how I feel about Imaginarium Theater in terms of how much I enjoyed it. To be honest, I enjoy it more than Spiral Abyss at this point. I've already talked about how it's just too easy. And I think a lot of it has to do with just the novelty aspect. Now that they have increased the difficulty with the new visionary mode, it is legitimately just a more novel experience because it requires more work from me in terms of how I think. At first, I thought that when they announced that they were adding two more stages to Imaginarium Theater, I didn't think too much of it because it was just, more stuff to kill, right? But it actually changes how I play the entire mode entirely because I have to be more strategic with how I ration my characters because they require you to have more characters now for the most difficult mode. However, they also decrease the amount of characters you need to do each difficulty now, so they did balance it out a little bit to make it more forgiving for newer players. It is still basically a character check, like, let's not get ahead of ourselves. It is basically still a character check. It requires you to have more characters. It's trying to incentivize you to pull for more characters outside of the ones that you have already vertically invested into to do Spiral Abyss. So that is still the case. But it is actually just more enjoyable now because it uses all my characters. Before, in the previous Imaginarium Theater, I still had way more characters than I needed to do the hardest difficulty, right? So I didn't really have to ration my characters because I had so many good characters that I was just used to playing that I could just play Imaginary Theater almost the exact same way that I did for Spiral Abyss. And the blessings didn't really matter too much. So it was basically just choose my best characters and then I could easy peasy unga bunga my way through Imaginarium Theater. That was how it worked in the past. But now in this new one, because there are more characters required to do the new stages, I actually am playing characters I legitimately have not used for so long or have never used. Like characters like Child, I literally pulled them once and then I never touched them ever again. I didn't use them in Spiral Abyss, didn't use them in the open world because he was just completely redundant. I had better Hydro units by the time I got Child. Characters like Candace, never used them either in anything. I never even I believe she is good now for Super Bloom for Nilu, but I'd never used her in that way because I just have better characters. Yinfei, again, I haven't used her since the 1.x series of patches. Yoimiya, never used her after I got Wander. I think Wander is just a better single target, DPS in general, and as well as a better AoE damage. Yoimiya is just too much of a niche option, but now I am actually using them, surprisingly. And I think that is probably the biggest strength for Imaginarium Theater right now, which is just that I am using all of these characters that I never had any use for in the past. And I know that people are still going to be complaining about how it is a character check, it's an element check. All of this is still true. But I'm just saying that personally, for me, in my subjective analysis of it, I am just having fun with the game mode at last. Then that was not the case with the previous game mode. And it's not just them forcing me to use new characters as well. Not new characters, I've had them for a long time. Just they're forcing me to use characters I never had a use for before. But it's not just that. It's not just that they added in new stages. I think they have also made some changes to the way that the bosses work. I've noticed that one of the bosses, the Baptismal Bishop, I think it's called, basically it's a giant lizard thing that you meet in Enkanomia. It had a unique ability where it spawned a field as well as a hydro shield where it would drain your energy if you were near to it. And if you didn't have energy, it would actually drain your HP. And I died to it multiple times because of that reason. And I think even though it might be a frustrating mechanic to deal with, it is really nice to see them adding more unique effects to the bosses so that they don't all feel the same. Like they're not just adding in straight up, an open world boss and just leaving it at that. Before it was exactly like that and was like exactly like that in Spiral Abyss as well. This kind of reminds me of how they have those events where the bosses have unique mechanics and actual unique abilities outside of the ones that they had back in the open world, right? So I'm hoping they double down on that and make it even more unique. Give the bosses unique mechanics, unique abilities, maybe even make them look a bit better. Like you have a golden Baptismal Bishop or a shiny, I don't know, shiny heralds and they glow in the dark or some shit. And they throw, I don't know, multiple abilities, multiple elements at you instead of just one. That's probably going to be extremely frustrating for a lot of players, but it just sounds cool. So I'm just listing things off the top of my head as it comes into my head. So the bosses are a bit more interesting. At least that one boss I fight, the Baptismal Bishop, was actually legitimately a bit more interesting, even though its ability was kind of gimmicky. And yeah, they've also made some changes to the way that blessings worked, so they feel more impactful now. At least I haven't really dug into the numbers that much, but to me, they feel both more straightforward as more impactful. It feels like they're doubling down on the things that the elemental reactions would do in the first place and then just making them better. So it feels more like it's just more intuitive. It's just like, oh, you do hyper bloom damage, here's more hyper bloom, or you do burning damage, here's more burning damage. And then there's also like little abilities that you get at the end of the skill trees. So it just feels better overall. The buffs are more significant, maybe even overly so. I've heard some people on the internet saying that it's just too powerful, so that it doesn't really matter what characters you have as long as you have the elemental reactions. But let's be honest, that's basically how Genshin Impact has always been. It's just like elemental reaction impact. So overall, it is just a better game mode. The elemental reaction buffs are better, the bosses are better. What else is better? There's more rewards. There's 180 more primos. Although I'm a bit skeptical about whether or not they were going to add that in the first place. I think they were always going to add that. Let's be honest. And they were just waiting for the opportune time. Maybe they were even waiting to add this in 5.0 to make it more hype than it was in the first place. So I don't know. This is just my conspiracy theory going on overdrive. Who knows? So that's basically all my thoughts on Imaginarium Theater at this point. I fully prefer this mode to the old Spiral Abyss, if only because of novelty factor. There's more battles, you need to use more characters, but at the same time, you get more benefits for having over characters over the limit. I don't know, I forgot if I did or did not mention this, but you can go over the limit of the characters now, right? They both lower the limit as well as give you more stats if you go over the limit. So I think the hardest mode requires you to have 22 characters, but you can go over the limit to have 26 characters. And if you have 26 characters or just one or two characters over the limit, then you get a buff to your stats. So it's just more soft incentiviers. Is that a word? There's just more incentives, but also softer incentives rather than hard limits. It is still at the end of the day a character check, but I also feel like my outlook on the end game for both Genshin Impact and gacha games in general has changed a bit. I've played a lot more gacha games at this point. I've played Honkai Star Rail. I've done all the end game content in that. I've done all the 1.0 holograms in Wuthering Waves to completion to all the hardest difficulty. I've done all the end game content so far in Zenless Zone Zero. Well, actually, that's not true. I haven't gone S on the last stage yet, but it is what it is, right? It's just a DPS check at this point. And for the most part, all of those games, when you get down to it, are just DPS checks and character checks. Even the survival mode in Zenless Zone Zero is kind of a character check. Like, yes, you can dodge better, you can play better, but if you're not doing enough damage, then at some point you're going to be doing so little damage that it's just going to be too much of a hassle, and you're eventually going to get attrition down. You can't really do it for like 30 minutes. If you do a battle for like 30, 40 minutes, at some point you're going to make a mistake and you're going to just die, right? So even the survival mode is in some way a character check. You have to do enough DPS with the right kind of characters, and if you don't have the right element of the right character, then it's just going to be so big of a hassle that, yeah, it's just not going to be fun. And I kind of felt that way as well once I got Jingxi. It was really weird how much damage Jingxi did compared to my previous characters, even compared to Jian. Then I went back to fight the previous bosses I did in 1.0 with Jingxi, and it just felt like an easier time. Maybe it's because I already fought those bosses before, but it just felt like she was doing more damage. I don't know. I haven't researched too hard into this, but from what I know, Jingxi is just a very strong character. So maybe it wasn't just me imagining things. It felt like I was doing more damage. I was like my active frames for my attacks were just bigger in general. I'm getting really off topic now, but what I'm saying is that my expectations for the end game in gacha games has lowered, and I think that there are problems intrinsic to having more end game as well. I don't think Honkai Star Rail's end game is perfect. It feels like the power creep is getting a bit too, maybe a bit too much in that section of the gameplay, and they have focused so much on the end game content that I think other parts of the game have suffered. There doesn't seem to be a lot of casual end game content in Honkai Star Rail, and that is probably what I would want for that game. And now that Genshin Impact is getting more endgame and they have improved that endgame, I don't think that it's actually it's not something that I'm going to complain about too much anymore in the future. I don't feel like I need to complain about this section of the game as much as before. Hopefully they do add in one more mode for the endgame content, but right now I'm somewhat satisfied. Maybe it'll change in the future I'm sure that after I do more Imaginarium Theater resets, I'm going to get bored of it and then I'll be complaining again. But for now, this is legitimately fun. I think this is the thing that I'm looking forward to most when it comes to Genshin's gameplay from here on out, right? This is the most fun I've had with Genshin's combat gameplay, so to speak, for the last year and a half, maybe ever since the Consecrated Beast. That was probably, I wouldn't say fun, it was frustrating at the time that I do it, but in hindsight, it was the last time I had any difficulty. And I'm not saying that Imaginarium Theater is difficult now, right? I didn't do it for more than like maybe 20. I think it only took me like 20 to 30 minutes to finish Imaginarium Theater to completion on the hardest difficulty. But from what I actually interacted with in that time, right, it was actually fun. And yeah, that's basically all it needs to be. Anyways, this is Bench Gamer signing out. I'll see you guys sometime. Bye bye.